Hola estudiantes y buenas. Welcome to another lesson. In this lesson we're going to be talking about Conjugation 2.0 and what that is the follow-up to the basic conjugation points that we talked about in the Conjugation 1.0 video. The Conjugation 1.0 video talked about the regular conjugations of AR, ER, and IR verbs in the Spanish language. This video, Conjugation 2.0, is going to get into more of the common irregularities, such as stem changing verbs, irregular yo form verbs, and reflexive verbs. Alright, I'm going to talk about the reflexive verbs first because basically speaking, a reflexive verb is going to be just a regular verb unless it has some of the other things going on with it that I'm going to talk about later in this video. So if you see a reflexive verb and there's no star next to it in my classes, that means that that reflexive verb is just reflexive and it doesn't have any other irregularity going on with it. You can recognize a reflexive verb in its infinitive form because it'll have this se at the end. That se is called a reflexive pronoun. A reflexive verb is a verb whose subject is also its object. In other words, a reflexive verb is something you do to yourself. There are some common examples that we have already used in class a lot, but we haven't talked about them yet. But bear with me here and we'll get these things going. Let's talk about this verb arreglarse. Arreglarse means to fix yourself or get yourself ready. We can use this verb reflexively to get yourself ready, or we can use arreglar non-reflexively to talk about fixing something else. So I could go home and say, necesito arreglar mi carro, which means I need to fix my car. And then after that, I can say, necesito arreglarme para salir. I need to get myself ready to go. So in the reflexive version of this verb, I'm using arreglar to talk about fixing myself up and getting ready to go, whereas the non-reflexive version, arreglar, I am using it to fix something else. So that's how it works. It is something that you do to yourself. When I teach reflexive verbs, I teach my students the mnemonic to help them remember chop and swap. And what that means is we're going to take arreglarse. First step that we're going to do is we're going to chop the se off of the end, like that. All right, so we're going to remove that se. The next step is to swap, and then the final step is going to be to conjugate. So step 1, chop. Step 2, swap. And then step 3, you're going to have to conjugate. You're going to need to conjugate both parts, the verb itself and the reflexive pronoun. So we've taken arreglar, arreglarse, we've chopped it, we've swapped it, so we've got the se in front. When we're talking about reflexive pronouns, just like a verb, it can take 6 different forms. If it is something I'm doing to myself, it's going to be me. If it is something that you are doing to yourself, it's te. If it is something he or she or you polite is doing to him or her or yourself, it is se. For something we do to ourselves, it's going to be nos. For in Spain, where they use y'all, it's going to be os. And then the third person plural, ellos, ellas, ustedes, is going to be se. Alright, so when we conjugate this verb arreglar, it needs to also get one of those reflexive pronouns. Alright, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to put in our reflexive pronouns first. So the 6 forms, the yo form is going to be me, 2 form is going to be te, el form, ella form, usted form is going to be se, nosotros, nos, vosotros, os, and then ellos, ellas, and ustedes, it's going to be se. All right, and then we're going to take that verb arreglar and we're going to conjugate it regularly. So this So when I conjugate this verb in all of its forms, it's got the reflexive pronouns out front, and then it's got the regular conjugation of the verb afterwards. So the yo form is going to be me arreglo. I fix myself up. Tu form, te arreglas. Él, ella, usted se arregla. Nosotros nos arreglamos. Vosotros os arregláis. And ellos, ellas, and ustedes se arreglan. And once again, it is the subject doing the verb to the subject. So me arreglo, I fix myself up. One thing to keep in mind with the reflexive verbs is, yes, you have to chop and swap them before you conjugate them. But another thing that we need to know about the reflexive verbs is that if any of the following irregularities, common irregularities, happen to the verb, if any other irregularities that we haven't discussed yet also happen to the verb, you not only have to observe the rules of reflexive verbs, you have to observe the rules of stem changing verbs, go-go verbs, and any other irregular verb that we talk about. The irregular yo form verbs that I'm going to mention in this video are going to be our go-go verbs and are what I call z-cousin verbs. These are verbs that when you conjugate them in the yo form, the I form in Spanish, they're going to take on some sort of a spelling change. They're going to be irregular in the yo forms, but then in every single other form, they are going to conjugate just like a regular AR, ER, or IR verb. The first example that I'm going to show you all is going to be the verb salir. Since these irregular yo form verbs are only going to be irregular in the yo form, I'm going to draw up a mini version of our conjugation chart that we use to learn about conjugation, and I'm just going to put a star right here in the yo form. I'm going to come into our conjugation chart over here for the verb salir, and I'm going to put a star in the yo form there. All right, so as it says right here, salir means to leave or to go out. And I put a star next to it because it's irregular, and the irregularity is going to be that it is a go-go verb. All right, so what that means is that in the yo form, I'm going to do this in red. Red means that you all should not write it down. I'm going to take this verb salir, and I'm going to conjugate it the way that I normally would. So regular conjugation says to take off the IR ending and just put an O in its place. All right, so salo is not the correct form in the yo form of the verb salir. Because it's a go-go verb, it's going to take an irregularity in the yo form. And so what it's going to look like is salgo with a G-O. All right, that is why I call it a go-go verb. It gets a go in the yo. As I mentioned, once you get past the irregularity in the yo form, everything else is going to conjugate regularly. So the rest of our forms of salir are just going to be normal IR verb endings with the root sal. Sales, sale, salimos, salís, and salen. Once again, salir. It's a go-go, means to leave or to go out, and that is what it looks like in all of its forms. All right, our next verb that I want to show you is the verb conocer, which means to know or to meet people. It can also mean to know or be familiar with places, or to know information like an expert. But conocer is a ZCO verb. I call them cousin verbs, and I tell people the Z is just silent. But that's just because I like to be silly. This is our chart again, and it's showing us that it is irregular in the yo form. With the star in the yo form. And so I'm going to give you guys the chart and show you conocer in all of its forms as well. But this time I'm going to write it in red, which means you definitely should not write this down. So normally we would take the verb and just its root and put that into our sentence. Right now it's just going into our conjugation chart. And then we would knock off the ER ending and put a regular ER ending onto it, which in this case would be conozco. All right, the problem with that is that when I put conocer into all the rest of its forms, so we've already mentioned that it's irregular in the yo form, but not in the other forms. So when I put conocer into the to form, and also when we look at it in its infinitive form, we notice that this C is followed by an E, which means that it's going to make the soft consonant sound like an S. It's going to be conoces, and this is conocer. But when we put an O behind it, what that's going to do is that's going to change it to the hard consonant sound. And just like a lot of other situations in the Spanish language, if you have the soft consonant sound in one form of the verb, in the main form of the verb, in the most basic form of the verb, then you have to have that soft consonant sound in all of the forms of the verb. And so what we're going to do instead with this one, in order to retain that soft consonant sound of the C, the S sound, we're going to put a Z right there, and then we're going to finish it off with CO. One of the things I often talk about in my Spanish classes is the fact that the letter C, as in cat, and the letter Z, as in zebra, are kind of sister letters in the Spanish language. And what I mean by that is, like, a lot of times when you have like a word like light, luz, all right, that's going to be spelled with a Z. But then if you want to pluralize that, you're going to take a spelling change on that. So C-E-S is going to be luces. And so the Z and this C are often interchangeable in the Spanish language. And so what's going on here is, to retain the soft consonant sound, we have inserted a Z into our infinitive right here, just to keep that S before we put the co at the end of it. So conozco. And that is what our ZCO cousin verbs are going to do. And so the rest of our forms for the verb conocer, all right, we've got conozco in the yo form, conoces in the to form, conoce, conocemos, conocéis, and conocen. And so as you see, these are just our regular ER verb endings that we have for our regular verbs from Conjugation 1.0. And that is go-go and cousin verbs. Okay, the next thing that I want to talk about are the stem-changing verbs. Stem-changing verbs are verbs that are going to undergo a spelling change in the stem or the root of the verb. When the stem-changing verbs do get the stem change, they don't get it in all of their forms. So once again, here comes our handy conjugation chart. The forms that take a stem change are the yo form, the first person singular, the to form, second person singular, the el form, ella form, and usted form, which is the third person singular, and then the ellos and ellas and ustedes form, which is the third person plural. A lot of teachers call these boot verbs or shoe verbs, because if I outline the areas where it takes that stem change, like I'm doing right now, that is going to give you something that is roughly shaped like a boot. There are 3 different types of stem changes that we were going to see while we're conjugating verbs in the Spanish language. The first one that I'm going to talk about is O to UE, and I will be using the verb morir to talk about that one. The next one is going to be E to IE, and I'm going to use entender as my model. And the final version is the E to I stem change, and I'm going to be using the verb pedir for that one. So morir means to die. Entender, to understand. And pedir, to ask for or to request. All right, so the verb morir, to die. O to UE stem change. There's only one O, so there's only one thing that we need to worry about stem changing here. But I will tell you that when it comes to stem changing verbs, if there are multiple syllables, if there are more than 2 syllables in the verb, it's always the syllable right before the ending that gets the change. And that'll make more sense on the next verb when we do entender. I'll explain that a little bit better then. But as you see, I've taken my chart and I have gone ahead and put the stars where the stem change is going to take place. And all that's going to happen is when we conjugate this verb in the yo form, instead of an O coming right after the M, we're going to do that stem change, O to UE. So this yo form is going to be yo muero. The to form is also quote unquote inside of the boot, so it is also going to get a stem change. So mueres. Tu mueres. L form, also inside the boot. Muere. Ellas form, inside the boot. Mueren. For the verbs outside the boot, I'm going to go ahead and switch colors to my blue marker. And this is going to be M-O-R-I-M-O-S. Morimos. So no stem change outside of the boot. And the vosotros form, which they only use in Spain, is going to also be the O instead of the UE. All right, so there it is, the verb morir. It is an O to UE stem change, and it gets the stem change in the yo form, to form, él, ella, usted form, and the ellos, ellas, and ustedes form. No stem change in the nosotros and vosotros forms because they are outside the boot. All right, and that brings us to our verb entender. So as I was mentioning, when you have more than 2 syllables and more than 2 e's in the root of the verb, you need to know which one is going to get the stem change. And so what I mentioned is that it's the syllable that comes directly before the ending. So if er is the ending of my verb, the one that comes right before it is going to be this first e. All right, so entender, that middle e is going to change to an ie, but once again, it's only going to do it when it's inside of the boot. And here's our verb entender in all of its conjugated forms in the present tense. So it is a boot verb, so we have a stem change in the yo form, yo entiendo. All right, we have a stem change in the to form, tú entiendes. Stem change in the el form, él entiende. In the nosotros form, we get no stem change, entendemos. Vosotros, only in Spain, entendéis. And then back inside the boot for the third person plural form, the ellos, ellas, ustedes, entienden. Okay, our final verb that I wanted to show you today for the stem changing verbs was pedir, to request, which is an E to I stem change. And here it is in all of its conjugated forms. So once again, E to I stem change only inside the boot. So the yo form, pido. To form, pides. Él, ella, usted, pide. Ellos, ellas, ustedes, piden. But outside the boot, nosotros and vosotros are going to be pedimos and pedís. All right, that is going to conclude this lesson on the common irregularities in conjugation, which I refer to as Conjugation 2.0. I hope this video was helpful. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments and I will get to them at a later date. If you are in my class, just ask me the question when you get to class and I will discuss it there. Muchas gracias, muchachos. Hasta luego.